Okay, so this video is based on a very historical event which took place in 1992, and it's based on when the UK joined the European exchange rate mechanism. And the whole video is about the run-up or the lead-up to and what happened on Black Wednesday. So you'll be looking at it in terms of a topic of exchange rates with obviously international trade, and looking at what is the ERM and how might, I suppose, relate to exchange rates. So to begin with, Black Wednesday, it refers to September the 16th, 1992. And that's when there was a collapse in the pound sterling, forcing the UK to actually withdraw from the ERM. So the UK was forced out of the ERM because it could not prevent the value of the pound from falling below the lower limit specified by the ERM. So what we're going to be looking at within this video is why exactly the UK wasn't able to intervene and keep it within the range, and what led to it and what happened afterwards. So, just to begin with, okay, I'm going to show you a quick video in a minute because a lot of this content is going to be based on a BBC documentary on Black Wednesday. But to start off with, when we're looking at the European exchange rate mechanism, the concept of the ERM at that point in 1992, so this was before the euro was created, but the UK decided, and it was, I suppose, Margaret Thatcher was in charge, but it was more, I suppose, Major's decision in terms of trying to get the UK to follow a similar, I suppose, inflation approach to some major European countries such as Germany. So John Major really wanted to bring the UK's inflation rate down, and they thought that if they looked at it from an exchange rate point of view, and they fixed or managed their exchange rate and pegged it onto that of the Deutschmark, it might help them to be able to achieve this. So I'm just going to show you a quick video now as to how they actually managed to do it.
It would be a revolution. The pound's value would be locked against the German Deutschmark and other European currencies. It could vary, but only a little. To maintain the pound's value, British interest rates had to match German ones. In theory, the pound would then be stable, equally attractive to investors. Whatever the Germans did to their interest rates, we would have to do the same. The hope, German discipline would give Britain a stable pound, low inflation, and German-style prosperity.
Margaret Thatcher decided to fix the exchange rate to the Deutschmark at £1 to 2.95 Deutschmarks. The only issue with that was there was no negotiation. So they didn't negotiate with Germany based on that exchange rate. And actually, when Germany was, when they were informed of that decision, they believed it to be too high. They thought it was not realistic, even though that was the exchange rate at the time. That obviously was going to fluctuate, and they believed that putting it at such a high rate, it wasn't going to help either country, and it wasn't going to really be, I suppose, a sensible approach and actually a sustainable approach. And I suppose Germany probably worried that it was going to mean that the UK were going to struggle to keep it managed within that range. And clearly, if you've got a country that has decided to peg their currency value to your currency value, and they've not decided to negotiate or discuss it with you, as a country, as for example Germany, they're probably not going to be too impressed by the UK's tactics, and therefore when Germany are obviously coming up with macroeconomic policies which might influence and might impact their exchange rate, they're not going to be too worried about other countries that have fixed it to their exchange rate, because at the end of the day, why should they? Why should they be concerned about a country that didn't negotiate that point? So this is a part of what was to come with Black Wednesday, because Germany, they did have particular domestic problems that they had to address, which did impact their exchange rate, which then would make that rate incredibly difficult to maintain. Now, another factor was the interest rates, and that is part of the ERM. And even, I mean, this was the first ERM, and then there's ERM2 with the adoption of the euro. So, for example, with Croatia and Bulgaria, they're part of ERM2, getting ready to possibly adopt the euro. And part of this is to keep interest rates as stable to the Eurozone as possible, because what that will do is, again, it'll boost that stability. So the whole idea was, if Germany's interest rates went up, the UK's interest rates went up as well. If Germany's interest rates went down, the UK's interest rates went down as well. And the whole reason for that was the concept of hot money. Because if Germany's interest rates went up and the UK's decided to go against the ERM rules and not put their interest rates up as well, then that'll create problems. Because what you'll find is, all of a sudden, these multinational firms or these individuals that are thinking about where to put their savings or their reserve profits, they're looking for the countries with the best rates. And if they all of a sudden see, for example, they're in the UK at the moment and they've got their finances saved in UK banks, but then they see Germany put their interest rates up, they're thinking, well, okay, I'll pull out of the UK, I'll demand Deutschmarks because I want to now save it in German banks because I'm going to get a better return because of their interest rate. But in doing so, that demand for the Deutschmark, and they're probably going to, if they've got it stored in the UK, they're going to supply the pound to the forex market to then buy the Deutschmark, and all that's going to do is depreciate the pound and appreciate the Deutschmark, and straight away the UK's got a problem there, because now it's going to be even harder for them to maintain that rate in terms of what they fixed or managed their exchange rate to. So, in order to do this, the UK had to match the interest rate of Germany to make the managed rate more viable, which you'll see again as the video progresses, they did not do.
But joining the ERM failed to bring instant prosperity. Britain had already been sliding into recession. Over the next 18 months, it got much worse. 1 million people lost their jobs. The high exchange rate of the pound, locked inside the ERM, meant businesses struggled to sell their goods abroad. The ERM reduced inflation, but there was little sign of German-style wealth.
People were finding it very hard to meet their mortgage payments. And when they failed to meet their mortgage payments and were obliged to sell their house, we were, for the first time in British post-war history, witnessing people selling houses for less than they'd paid. And that dreadful new word, negative equity, came into the language. It was a very, very hard time.
Down and make Britain a low inflation economy. They've never succeeded. I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the Prime Minister that got inflation down and established Britain as a low inflation economy. To which one of our numbers said, yes, but this could be the low inflation of the dead. What's the point of having low inflation if the economy is not just on its knees, but on its back? Anybody can do that.
When the UK did go into the ERM at that rate, all the hopes that John Major and Margaret Thatcher had in terms of helping the UK almost follow in the footsteps of Germany and their robust economy. And what they were hoping for is obviously at a strong rate, it would allow them to reduce the cost of imports and therefore helping to reduce I suppose just general costs for suppliers within the UK, which would help to bring down, obviously, inflation instead of any cost-push inflation that might have been experienced. The only issue was the UK, where they were experiencing lots of problems. There were lots of issues. The UK were in a recession. Confidence was very, very low. Consumption was drying up. And if you're trying to target a policy which reduces the cost of imports, and the whole reason that you wanting to be importing goods is to actually fuel and facilitate consumption, but if consumption isn't there, then actually the benefits of those imports is pretty pointless. And furthermore, it's actually really, really detrimental to those UK firms that were dependent on international trade and selling it to other countries, because actually their exports became more expensive. And when we're looking at spice, then we're looking at imports being cheaper, but the imports are not fueling the consumption because confidence is low. But exports being dearer means that there's going to be less demand for UK goods or UK services. Then it's going to be problematic. So it didn't really work. And there were also going to be problems to come with what was happening in Germany.
But the Germans were about to increase the pain. The men who ran Germany's central bank prepared to meet. It wasn't politicians, but the Bundesbank Council who set Germany's interest rates. Whatever they decided, Britain would have to follow. But in Germany, the unthinkable was happening. The economy was faltering. The cost of unification with East Germany was higher than predicted, and inflation was rising. The Bundesbank Council raised interest rates.
Our decisions were made on the basis of what is necessary at home. Our primary target in that time was to go on in fighting the acceleration of price increases in our country. This is the Bundesbank's main target.
Inside the ERM, we should in theory have followed Germany's rising interest rates to keep the value of the pound steady. But the British government desperately tried to avoid doing this.
If we wanted to stay in the ERM, we had to match those interest rates. But if we matched German interest rates, that meant higher interest rates in the UK, hitting the housing market above all in a way that became increasingly politically and economically unsustainable.
In the city, the crisis that would become Black Wednesday was brewing. The currency dealers began to sell pounds and buy Deutschmarks because of the high German interest rates. The pound's value fell towards its bottom limit in the ERM. Rumours spread that the government was about to devalue, locking the pound to the Deutschmark at a lower level. The government frantically tried to restore confidence.
Just in case there is the slightest scintilla of doubt, there are going to be no devaluations, no leaving the ERM. We are absolutely committed to the ERM. That is our policy. It is at the centre of our policy. We are going to maintain sterling's parity, and we will do whatever is necessary. And I hope there is no room for any doubt about that at all, that the government is determined to maintain our position.
So, as you can see from the year 1992, and this was the inflation rates in Germany at that time. And if we think about, especially at the beginning of the year, when we look at January to June, you can see that the inflation rate, it was increasing, especially up until May. And that was causing problems for Germany. And clearly, if Germany have got problems with inflation, then Germany want to address that problem of inflation. And the German central bank obviously intervened. And how they did that was via monetary policy and contractionary monetary policy by increasing interest rates. So therefore they increased interest rates, but by the rules of ERM, then the UK should have done so. But the UK, they were not in a position to do so because of obviously what we looked at before with the UK and how the UK was performing. You've got a situation where obviously the UK's housing market was really, really struggling. And we had this concept, which was mentioned before, of negative equity, where people were actually selling their houses for less than they bought them for. And you had a situation where actually there was a housing crisis. And the worst possible thing that you could do when you've got a housing crisis is to increase interest rates. Because all of a sudden that means that mortgages are more expensive. That means the demand for mortgages will probably go down, which means the demand for housing will go down. And that will mean that the value of houses further plummet. And the UK did not want that. And that's one of the issues with having a managed or a fixed exchange rate, is it does cause conflicts with your own macroeconomic objectives. Now, like I said before, as rules of the ERM, the UK should have followed the policy of Germany. But they actually rebelled against it and said, you know what, we're not going to increase our interest rates because we cannot do it. We cannot do it in the economic sense because of the housing market, and then that would also be a political sense in terms of their popularity because it would really go against them. So they decided against increasing their interest rates, but straight away that brings about the problem of hot money, and as you expect, all of a sudden Deutschmarks were going to be bought, and the UK pound was going to see less demand and actually more supply to buy Deutschmarks.
Next morning, the lira was devalued by 7%. The Germans cut their interest rates by a tiny 1/4%. Those dealers who had held on to the lira lost fortunes for their clients. Many started to sell pounds. They feared a British devaluation would be next.
UK investment funds and indeed pension funds all of a sudden they can see all these strains building up in Europe, and the pound is clearly going to come under pressure. They're holding all these pounds and they want to get rid of them because they think the value of the pound is going to go down. So they started.
UK wasn't the only one that was struggling with the ERM. Okay, so Italy were also struggling with the ERM, and Italy was in a similar situation where they were struggling to maintain the rate at which they set, and they pretty much had two options. Germany said to them, "Look, you either devalue and do a different managed exchange rate at a lower value, or you have to also change your interest rates." And so Germany was putting pressure on many countries within the ERM to follow their interest rate policy. The options were, as I said before, devalue, and therefore it puts less pressure on them to try and maintain that rate. Now, at first, a lot of countries were reluctant to do either, and the UK actually rejected both at that point when Germany pleaded with them to act on it. Italy did act though, and Italy decided, okay, you know what, we will devalue. We have to devalue our currency. But then all of a sudden, you had all these currency traders that had kept hold of the lira, and all of a sudden, when they devalued the currency of the lira, these currency traders had lost millions and millions of lira, and they were obviously very, very worried about what they had experienced with the lira repeating itself with the pound. So all of these currency traders that had missed the opportunity to sell the lira when it was at its higher rate, and then when it devalued, obviously it was worth less, and then they sold it, and they lost, like I said before, millions of lira. They did not want the same to take place. So they speculated that the pound probably was going to follow the lira, and the central bank and the Bank of England was also going to devalue. And to avoid the losses that they experienced with the lira, they started to speculate on the pound and sell the pound, which caused even further problems for the Bank of England, because that speculation was just hitting the pound even further and making it even more difficult for the Bank of England to intervene and get it at the rate as to what they wanted.
We got in to work at 6 o'clock because Schlesinger had made his comments the night before, and with what happened in the lira, we were all pretty worried that the pound was going to come under a lot of pressure that day.
And so the drama began. The rumours of a devaluation meant that to hold on to sterling was a gamble. Banks, pension funds, international companies told their dealers to sell the pound, and then the speculators joined the fray. George Soros gambled £5 billion, selling while sterling was still high, but intending to buy back cheaply if the pound devalued and make a fortune.
The Bundesbank was basically egging on the speculators to speculate against the weaker currencies. And we took our cue, actually, from the Bundesbank.
Get some dollar markers going out. I need some cable called, so I've got to stop loss.
The Bank of England hoped it could make George Soros lose his gamble. It planned to sustain the pound's value by buying pounds at the official high ERM rate. Billions of pounds of public money were about to be thrown into the defence of the pound.
We decided that as the London market came in, we would intervene on a scale which would make it quite clear that we were intervening, and that's what we did.
It was incredible. I mean, obviously you can hear what's going on in the market, and you can hear wave after wave of selling hitting the market, being met with resistance and support by the Bank of England. They were buying such a phenomenal amount of pounds.
One of the really influential investors, traders, speculators was George Soros. Now, George Soros, he's already very influential anyway, especially at that time. So when George Soros started to act, others acted as well. And this was known as a run on the currency. So what he believed was this was the time to almost like short the pound, almost treat the pound like it was going to fail, speculate against the pound. And what he wanted to do was sell the pound now, wait till it depreciated even further, and hit that point where obviously maybe the central bank was either forced to devalue or they actually were forced to withdraw from ERM. But either way, the pound was going to plummet. And once it did do that, then George Soros would then buy the pound back, but at that lower rate. and therefore obviously he will have made a lot of money. And in fact, as you can see, he made over £1 billion by the end of Black Wednesday. Now, he's also known as the man who broke the Bank of England. So when we're looking at Black Wednesday, George Soros, as I said before, he was very, very influential. And as you can see from the videos, his speculation against the pound, obviously, it really put pressure on the central bank. It really put pressure on the Bank of England at maintaining that rate. And to be honest, it made it impossible. He wasn't able to. The Bank of England weren't able to. Now, when we're looking at George Soros and looking at how he made over £1 billion, we're not saying that he was obviously speculating by selling a couple of million of pounds. He was selling a large amount. Okay, he was selling close to £1 billion, if not in excess of £1 billion of pounds, that which really have a massive impact on the exchange rate. And again, if George Soros is doing that, others will follow suit. So then they will put even more pressure on the pound as well.
For months, John Major had not put up interest rates. Now, after anguished debate, he agreed a rise to 12%.
The Prime Minister thought that this interest rate increase was absolutely explosive in terms of its political impact, given the state of the economy, the recession, and particularly the housing market.
In the Admiralty House dining room, the Prime Minister met three of his most senior ministers: Michael Heseltine, Douglas Hurd, and Kenneth Clarke. He asked them to endorse his decision.
We got the message. Douglas Hurd, Michael Heseltine and myself, we were in a sterling crisis, and he wished to put up rates dramatically to show the political will, to defend the value of the pound, to see if it would have the effect of stabilising it and stopping the flow of our reserves out, because we were defending at the time simply by buying sterling as much as we could using our own golden currency reserves. And he got the agreement of the group that we had to raise interest rates. It was necessary. Off we went, raised rates by 2%.
Anyone want to buy a house?
Watch out, excuse me.
Intended to show strength, the markets perceived the rate rise as weakness and reacted accordingly.
We had a fairly strong sense that we were on to the kill. It indicated to us that we are in at the end game, that there was no, this was an act of desperation. So instead of restraining us, it was really an invitation to double up, to try to sell as much more as possible.
The Bank of England had some £19 billion in foreign currency reserves, but it was now spending £2 billion an hour as more and more people sold the pound.
When Germany put up their interest rates, they did try to put some pressure on the UK, and they did say, look, you need to follow suit. You need to follow the rules of the ERM, and you need to also increase your interest rates, which clearly the UK government rejected and said they wouldn't do it. They also told them to devalue, which again the UK government rejected and wouldn't do it. And then obviously when the speculation started to take place and they started to see the impact of hot money outflows as well as speculation, it got to a point where the UK government were desperate and they had to do something. And it was almost like becoming these last resorts. So they finally accepted that they were going to increase the interest rate. So the interest rates were increased twice in one day, from 10% to 12%, and that didn't work. Okay, again, George Soros and others just saw that as a sign of weakness, because they saw, okay, they've rejected increasing interest rates all this time, and all of a sudden now they are increasing interest rates since we've acted. All that suggests to me is they are getting desperate, so we're winning, so let's sell more pounds. So again, they tried again and they increased it to 15%. It slightly increased the value of the pound, probably because of a little bit of hot money inflows, but not enough. And again, speculators thought that was even more desperation. And I suppose they could see the end in sight. So as I said before, it went from 10% to 12% to 15% in a vain attempt to prop up the value of the pound, but it didn't work.
In the last 15%. 15%. What? 15%. 15%. What? Tomorrow. 15% MLR.
The interest rate market, which was sitting 30 yards away, exploded in noise. We thought, we can't believe it, the Bank of England's raised interest rates again. That was a sign of weakness, not of strength.
The more those rates go up, the more it's going to be worse for the pound, isn't it? Mortgage rates, no way. 10 done. Dollar mark.
There was a very, very small rally in sterling. It went up maybe a third of 1%, a very, very small rally for such a big rise in the interest rates, and immediately settled back on the floor. And the Bank of England was still buying pounds.
That afternoon, it became a veritable avalanche of selling.
So, as Black Wednesday obviously came to a close, the UK was forced to withdraw from the ERM, so it went from a managed exchange rate to a free floating exchange rate, which it is today. And just to kind of tell you what eventually happened, the official figures at the time showed that reserves had only dwindled by about £2 billion. Overall, the cost of the operation was estimated to be at £3.3 billion, and the Bank of England's losses were estimated to be at £800 million. Because the Bank of England had to use so many reserves, and every time they were buying the pounds, they were buying at the highest rate of the ERM, clearly when then the pound continued to depreciate, they were losing value on that pounds that they were buying. And to buy that pound, they obviously had to use their foreign reserves. And clearly that had a massive impact on their foreign reserves and the amount of foreign reserves that they had. Now, even like I think it was a couple of years ago, there was a lot of articles by, for example, the Financial Times, that we don't necessarily have all the figures of Black Wednesday. A lot of it was hidden and kept secret from the general public because they knew how detrimental it would be to their popularity. But there is an idea that actually there was a lot more money that was lost than I suppose what was first reported. Now, just to put it into kind of a historical context of how detrimental this day was, if we have a look at the depreciation of all the currencies, so we can see the devaluation, the sterling crisis, the Black Wednesday, the EU referendum. If I move to the other side, we've got a financial crisis and we've got a devaluation in 1949. We can see with the Black Wednesday, it depreciated by minus 17.2%, even though they kept trying to intervene and so on. And again, that's a really is a significant amount. Now, when we look at, for example, the financial crisis and the devaluation, they're different factors. And the financial crash, we will have a look at another video based on that.
Today has been an extremely difficult and turbulent day. Massive speculative flows continue to disrupt the functioning exchange rate mechanism. As chairman of the Council of European Finance Ministers, I have called a meeting of the Monetary Committee in Brussels urgently tonight to consider how stability can be restored to the foreign exchange markets. In the meantime, the government has concluded that Britain's best interests are served by suspending our membership of the exchange rate mechanism. As a result, the second of the two interest rate increases that I sanctioned today will not take place tomorrow, and minimum lending rate will be at 12% until conditions become calmer. I will be reporting to Cabinet, discussing the situation with colleagues tomorrow, and may make further statements then. But until then, I have nothing further to say. Thank you.